And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of the Talk Talk. I'm your host here, Serena, alongside me co-host Dan Kiley. Dan, Tuesday afternoon, first episode after a loss in over 2 years on this platform. First loss that you've been with us this Tuesday evening or Tuesday afternoon.
So I blame myself. I bought a new Georgia jacket and I was wearing it during the game. So I'm taking responsibility for this loss. No, hey, listen, in all seriousness, it has been one hell of a run. And like you said, this is the first podcast that we've done after a loss in almost 2 years. I mean, that's incredible if you think about it. And, I was talking to one of my good friends the other day, and he said, man, I hope it's not another 40 years between this championship and the next. And I was like, no, I don't think it will be. But at the same time, they didn't think it was 40 years ago. So my point was, well, I'm glad I was here to enjoy it. And remember, before the season started, we talked about making sure that we enjoyed this because what we were doing was not normal and it wasn't meant to last. Like the sustained success that Georgia has had in that 29 game winning streak, that's incredible. I mean, it's not sustainable. Like it doesn't like it's nearly impossible to be perfect for that long. So you knew it was going to come to an end. So I'm glad that we made a conscious effort to try to enjoy it while it would lasted.
Yeah, I mean, I think what hit home for you talk about that was a Florida documentary where Urban Meyer kind of said that he wasn't enjoying it anymore when he was at Florida, and that's what made him step away. And I think that's probably the one thing that Florida fans kind of ruined for themselves is they made the pressure so insurmountable that they had their best coach leave. So let's enjoy. It was a great run. Put that out for perspective. That stat Dan brought up to me the other night when we were talking about the show. It was crazy, but let's hop right into it. We are skipping over hot topics. We will have rants in between this. I am sure of it. We discussed 2 last night, but it's not anything formal. It's not going to be built in as a segment. It's just going to be as we're talking about. Dan, Georgia, Alabama SEC championship game. Alabama pulls out the W. Going into this game, we both felt like Georgia was going to win it after kind of a week of unsure about what Georgia team we were going to get. But I think you said it best. What you said for the last 2 years was when Georgia feels like they have a worthy opponent, they show up. And I don't want to say Georgia didn't show up because that's not the case. But it wasn't the same Georgia team that we had seen in other big games over the last few years. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah, it really is a difficult analysis. And now we've, obviously because we didn't do our show right after the game, we've had an opportunity to listen to what other people say, right? So you have that opportunity to rewatch it, which I promised you I would never do. And I haven't. I have not rewatched it, even though it's still on my TV. I have not rewatched it. But, you hear what people say. And my opinion is kind of not really changed. It's maybe softened a little bit. Like I sent out a tweet at the end of the game and said, defense, the game is in your hands. You're either elite or you're not. And unfortunately, they weren't. Now, is that to say that we lost the game because our defense played terrible? No, that's not the point of it at all. It's just, it was one of those scenarios where we gave ourselves a chance and we didn't capitalize. And how many times in this 29 game win streak? Now, listen, we understand that I believe, if I'm not mistaken, and I know that Jonathan's in the comments, so he's just the stat guru. If I'm not mistaken, 24 of the 29 wins were by double digits.
That sounds correct.
It sounds right, but Jonathan will correct me if I'm wrong. But I think it was 24 or 29. So you're talking about really 5 games where you had to come up with a win, like literally had to come up with a win, and they've been able to do it every single time. So we haven't seen Georgia not deliver when given the opportunity to win a football game in a really, really long time. So immediately after the game, and you and I had talked about this and everybody else, and God knows, is I wasn't angry. Like anger never entered my body. It was an empty feeling, just like an empty feeling. And then almost like a desperate feeling because we were playing Alabama and all week long, it didn't matter how well prepared we were, how confident we were, in the back of everyone's mind. And I don't care if you'll admit it or not. That's fine. You can say, Dan, you're lying. It doesn't matter. Every single Georgia fan in the back of your mind is like, shit, it's Alabama. And not like I'm scared of Alabama. It's just, I know the story. I've seen this movie before. I hate the ending to this movie.
Saw it 2 years ago.
This is a terrible movie. I don't want to go back to see this movie. This is like making me go see The Omen again. Like, no, I'm not going to go see that movie. And then you just sit through it and you're like, oh boy, here we go. And it played out that way. We're going to talk about a lot of stuff, but that was just my initial reaction. Is that after the game, I had really hoped our defense would come up, give us a stop, and I really wanted to see what would have happened if we had the ball in our hands, right? And then after the game, anger never entered my attitude. It was just almost like despair and emptiness, just like, oh man, it's over.
No 30 games in a row, no college football playoff. I think that was the first thing came to my mind is Georgia's out. Like, unless a miracle happens, Georgia's out of the college football playoffs, which sucks considering they went 12-1, won 29 games straight, had I think it's the third regular season in a row where they went undefeated, and they're out. And it's not like they played nobodies. It's not like they played Florida State schedule and beat like 2 ranked teams, and then they lost. They played 4 ranked teams, and they lost to the best team of their schedule, and they're out.
Hold on. But let me just throw this in there. Florida State has 3 wins over a team with a winning record. You play 12 games. Now add in Louisville, that's 4, right? So if we're going to count Louisville, then it's 4. It's 4 wins over teams with a winning record. So out of the 13 games you played, 9 had losing records. Miss me with that. Me with that. Okay, go ahead.
Everybody talks about how you're good. You're good. Everybody talks about how the Eagles went undefeated and got left out of the playoffs. Where I'm like, okay, you're not talking about parity in the NFL. There's parity on the schedule. Like, not everybody's schedule is created equal here in college football. Not everybody's schedule is created equal at all, anywhere near it. But anyways, Dan, getting back to this football game, you talked about the defense getting that one last stop. In my mind, I just had to go back, pull up here on the stat sheet here on the computer. We saw this movie before, like you said. Georgia was down. Georgia was trailing. I believe Georgia trailed by 10 points a couple times in this football game. Kind of reminded me of when you were trailing by, 14 or 17 to Ohio State last year. And Georgia, to go win the game, basically what won them the game was their defense got a stop after Georgia cut the Ohio State lead to 3. Georgia held them to a field goal to give their offense, to only put their offense down 6. All their offense needed was a touchdown, and that's what they did. Their offense got back on the field. They went down and scored. That's how it happened. And then Georgia had to go get another stop, and thankfully that field goal was wide left. But that was kind of throwing through my mind, throughout this game is if Georgia's offense gets back on the field, this is Carson Beck's moment to say, hey, I can do what Stetson Bennett did and go win this football team, a big game with the game on the line. Dan, let's get into from the top to the bottom, from minute 15, of the start of the first quarter all the way down to the 0. That it was a heck of a first drive for the offense and the defense. You force a 3 and out, you get a sack on 3rd down to make them punt, and you're like, okay, that's awesome. This feels good. You go on offense, you carve them up, just absolutely carve them up with really balanced approach. After that, and you score, you're up 7-0. And for me, I was like, okay. Like, usually when I've watched Georgia games this year, no matter if Georgia gives up a touchdown on the first drive or not, I just want to see that first drive. Because if the offense is hitting on that first drive, that's an instant sigh of relief for me. Like, okay, we're going to get a good game today from this Georgia team. They had that good first drive on offense. Really good first drive. But it was after that where things went downhill.
It was kind of funny because right after that drive, I got on to Twitter or X or whatever. Do we have to call it X now?
No.
Anyway,
Twitter.
So I got on Twitter and some Georgia fan, I don't remember who it was. I would give them credit if I did remember, but they're like, oh, hell, we lost. We scored first. Like, it's over. Like, oh, my, why did we do that? We should have let them score. No, but, I mean, you're right. That first defensive series looked really good. Milroe looked terrible on that first series. And then, like you said, that offensive drive was just a thing of art. Now, I don't know how much effect this had, and I don't think there's any way to really know. But if I'm not mistaken, it was either the first play of, or it was the last play of the first drive that Mims got hurt. Was it the first play of the next drive, or was it the last play of the first drive?
I think it was the next drive that he got hurt.
All right, so from the point that he went out, like, did we really change things to cater to him not being in the lineup? Or, I mean, I don't know what the deal was, but we looked really uncomfortable for the next couple drives. And I don't know if that's because we had a new guy in the offensive line, but that very first drive was a thing of beauty. It was a thing of art. And like, my wife doesn't watch hardly any football outside of Georgia. Like she'll sit through a little bit of an NFL game with me, and usually she's on her phone or she's doing grading or something like that. So she's not 100% paying attention. But when she watches a Georgia game, she pays attention, and she watches almost every single Georgia game. I'm not going to say she watches all of them, but she watches most of them. And I bring up all that just to say that after that drive concluded, when we scored the touchdown, she looked at me and she goes, "That was really easy. We did that really, really easy." And she's like, "Are we going to be able to do that easy all night long?" And I was like, "Yeah, I don't think so." I mean, I would be shocked. And I don't think I even tweeted or texted you guys anything. I think after that first drive, I kind of kept my mouth shut because I didn't want to jinx it. And then they come back out second drive, and if I'm not mistaken, 3 and out again, and the ball right back. And I was like, "Oh hell, 2 3 and outs, and we're going to get the ball back and have a chance to go put it right down their mouth." And then we ran it 3 straight times and punted. And Kenny wasn't, and Kendall wasn't even one of the guys to get a carry on that drive, if I'm not mistaken.
It was. So the first 3 and out for Georgia was 3 straight passes. The next one was 3 straight runs.
Okay. All right. Yeah. But I don't know, man. I'm not going to blame Bobo, right? Like, do I think he called his best game? No, I don't think he called his best game, but we didn't lose the game because of Bobo. I mean, we lost the game because we didn't execute. If we're being honest, we didn't execute. Do I think that Schumann, Kirby, and Muschamp didn't have a defensive plan? No. Do I think that we were calling the wrong defensive plays? No. I mean, could we have made a different adjustment possibly? Maybe. I don't know. I mean, you had some freshman linebackers out there, and I'm not crapping on the young guys. I'm just saying, do I think that having JDJ in the middle of that defense would have been better? Like, hell yeah. I mean, the guy's one of the best in the country for a reason, right? I mean, there's a
fully
reason.
healthy Smell Mondon would have helped too.
I'm just saying, like, you can't point at anybody. Like, there was not one thing that lost Georgia that football game. It was a magnitude of things that added up. And also, sometimes you have to tip your cap to the other team and say you did a hell of a job. I mean, Caleb Downs, that's my guy. You know that. But Caleb Downs affected a lot of those running plays by coming downhill. Like, he didn't make a tackle on 2 of them, but on 2 of them, he changed the direction of the running back right into the mouth of the defense. And, like, I was impressed when they showed the one, and they actually slowed it down and showed Caleb looked like he was shot out of a cannon. You know what that is? That's really good film work. They knew that play was coming. It's just, that's how it goes sometimes, man. And that's pretty much how I felt at halftime, is that Alabama made more adjustments, and they were playing with all night long. They were playing with house money. Like, it didn't matter if they won or they lost, right? Because, there was a chance that they weren't going to get in regardless. So they had nothing to lose. And when you can play a game loose, knowing you have nothing to lose, a lot of times you end up playing way better than you do if you have something to lose.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That brings me back to the quote that Carson apparently gave the silent reporter before the game about how, we know we have this streak, but we're not here to protect it. We're going to attack. We're going to attack this game. We're not sitting back to protect it. And at times I feel like Georgia was protecting their streak and their ability to win this game. You bring up the adjustments. That's a really good point, because Nick Saban said post-game in his interviews that they switched after that first drive. They switched what defense they're playing. Instead of playing in the first drive, he said they were in one high safety. You got a safety in the box, and they were trying to play Georgia in a lot of zone. Come out the next drive after Georgia cars them up, Dan, they're in a 2 high split safety look for the rest of the game, and they're manning you up. And game after game this year, I think Georgia's been the aggressor when it comes to the adjustments. I mean, you go look at Ole Miss. You go look at Tennessee. Georgia has made adjustments on the fly and has won football games because their coaches have simply just out-game planned, have out-adjusted their opponents. That's just what happened to Georgia this weekend. Saban made the adjustment, and we really didn't see the adjustment from Georgia until the game was on the line and you had to go down and score. So, and like you said, it's not on Bobo. It's not on the defense. It's not on one person. But as you said, Dan, I wish I saved the tweet because I saw it before the game last week. It had the odds probability of a Georgia win with, the turnover categories. I wish I remember what it was, but Georgia was -1 in the turnovers on Saturday, -1. And I wanted to say, if I remember correctly, Georgia's odds of beating Alabama -1 in turnovers drastically dropped. Drastically. And we're not talking about two turnovers. We're talking about just one. And Georgia was -1. And that came at a time where Georgia, I believe it was just scored a touchdown, just got the lead within 3 again. And granted, your defense bails you out, holds them to 3, gets their lead only back to 10. But what are we doing? What are we doing? I don't want to be the couch, coordinator, but we're running a reverse inside our own 20-yard line, Dan. And I get it. I saw a thread on Twitter of somebody putting up
where they ran it last
plays,
week for 26 points.
But they were at midfield.
Yes,
and they were at midfield.
Thank you.
Every time they've ran it, they've not been anywhere near inside their own 20-yard line. So, hey, I get it. They've worked. It worked in the past. They've executed it well. And really, it comes down to they just didn't execute the pitch. But why are we running it, inside our own 20 where you're giving the offense a chance to go down and score real easy? Is my one criticism there with that. Dan, I want to ask you this. Let's get your perspective on Carson Beck in this passing game. This wasn't his best game by far. But when I go back and look at the stat sheet, I'm like, dang, he only had 8 completions. But I know off the top of my head, about 3 of them probably could have been picks.
So here, the one thing that has bothered me a little bit about this Georgia passing game is I don't feel like, and maybe I'm wrong. I mean, maybe it's just like selective amnesia. I don't know. But I just don't feel like we take downfield shots. I really don't. Like Alabama loves to take those downfield shots. They love to just drop back, play action, and just heave ho, just let it go. And I really don't feel like Georgia does that enough. And that, again, it's my perspective. It's my analysis, whatever. You can agree with me or you can disagree with me. That's your own prerogative. I love teams that are aggressive, that take those downfield shots, because it always feels like it opens up a lot of the other stuff. And especially if you have a guy like Arian Smith, who's arguably one of the fastest guys around. And then let's be honest, I had no idea who Evans is. But apparently, track guy, one of the fastest guys in America. Why can't we run that kid on a go? You don't have to have elite route running skills to say, hey, go run as fast as you can, and I'm going to throw it as far as I can. And then there was one play from Carson. I think, it was the Arian Smith catch. Is if he just puts some air under that ball and lets him run under it, it's a touchdown. It's a walk-in touchdown. Arian Smith had about 5 or 6 yards of separation on the DB. I think that was Arnold in coverage. No, it was the linebacker that was in coverage. Who was in coverage on that deep shot, Arian? Because I remember Nick Saban talking to Roman Harper, and he said it was a linebacker that blew the coverage on that. But anyway, it doesn't matter.
Maybe. I don't remember.
Yeah, but the whole point is that if it was a better throw, it would have been a touchdown. So is it fair to say Carson didn't have his best game? Sure, it's fair to say that. He missed some opportunities. Maybe he wasn't as sharp as he could have been. But there's a lot of different factors in that. In no way, shape, or form am I putting that loss on Carson. Listen, there are some people who are trying to do that. I think that's kind of silly, right? I wouldn't. And then I heard a lot of people really, really crapping on this offensive line, Harrison. I know you've seen some of that too, where they say that both lines of scrimmage got dominated. Now, I think you can make an argument the defensive line didn't hold up very well, okay? Those 2 guards from Alabama were absolutely mashing, and they were having their way up front for the majority of the game. Like, was it every play? No, it wasn't every play, but it was the majority of the game. But I really felt like Georgia's offensive line played pretty well. How many did Carson Beck get sacked? Once, right? On that 3rd down?
Once. Yeah, you're twice.
So, out of a whole game against one of the most elite defenses in the country, you gave up 2 sacks. And the one was because he was holding it, trying to find somebody downfield. The other one, I think, was pretty quick. But anyway, it doesn't matter. I thought the offensive line played pretty well. I thought both running backs ran hard. Just, the lanes weren't there. And again, sometimes you have to credit the defense, right? I mean, they're out there. It's a game where we didn't have a talent advantage. The talent is even on both sides. So it's going to come down to who makes the adjustments and who makes the plays when they're there to be made. And unfortunately, it just wasn't our night. And that's what it is. And I see all these people talking about, don't bash these kids, don't bash the coaches. I really haven't seen a whole lot of that. And maybe that's because I don't follow a bunch of morons on Twitter. But I really haven't seen a lot of it. And if you are, that's not right. Like, those kids played hard. I thought the coaches, they coached hard. Just wasn't our night.
Dan, I saw this. Aaron Murray asked this on the Letterman show to Ben Jones. I'm curious as to your answer. I think I sent you the clip. I want your opinion on this. Along the lines, he asked them a question along the lines of, is it to the point now where Georgia goes to play Alabama and they see the A or see Nick Saban, and there's just automatically a sense of doubt? Like, and it's crazy to even ask that,
it's real.
You won a championship against them 2 years ago. But is that something you see?
It's real. If you lived through the 90s and 2000s, it was real when we saw Florida. There were many times that Georgia had the better team. There were many times Georgia was favored to win that game, but we lost to Florida every single time. That long ride back from Jacksonville. A damn guy wrote a song about it. Okay. It's because it's real. Like that thing with the Florida Gators was real for the longest time, going down to Jacksonville. And just as soon as you saw that orange, just like you pissed your pants and you lost the football game. And that's real. Teams can be in your head, right? So I wouldn't go. I don't know how far I would take that. But actually, that really does lead me to a rant. So can I get to a rant?
Go ahead. So, transition.
Jeremiah put this up in our thing, and we were going to talk about it anyway. And that is that every time Georgia plays Alabama, all right. So what they're 0-9 or 0-8 in the SEC championship game against Alabama, or in their last. It's not that many SEC championship games. I think it's just 0-8 in the last times they played Alabama,
something like that.
Or 1-9. Yeah, other than the national championship. Well, in every single one of those games, okay. Now listen, I'm not tinfoil on the head guy. I'm just, maybe this isn't a rant. Maybe this is a hypothesis. Yeah, I'm hypothesizing with y'all, and I would like for your opinions. Isn't it ironic that every time we play Alabama, except for the national championship game, Tyler Simmons is offsides, or, the catch that was a catch or wasn't a catch. It just seems like there's always something. And where the officiating gets in the way or something happens, just random, complete coincidence that it only happens for Alabama. But doesn't it just seem that way every single time you play them? Just something happens. And, in this game, like face mask right in front of the official, not called. Holding where our defensive end is wrapped up like a seatbelt, not called. There was one play, they glossed over it really, really quick, but I believe it was Gary that pointed it out, where one of the Georgia players got tripped. Like the run, like you're not allowed to trip. And that happened. So I don't know. Like, Harrison, this isn't a long rant or anything like that, but just jump in there, because it's just every time you play Alabama, and I know that they always say you got to play Alabama and the refs, and I try to stay away from that. But my God, if it's not every time, it's like, when has a questionable call ever gone against Alabama? Ever? Like I can't come up with nothing, man. I've got nothing for you. I like, when we talked about this the other day, I went through and I looked at stuff, and I was trying to find a call that just killed Alabama. I have not been able to find one. You got anything?
I mean, look, even in the game Georgia won, there's the phantom fumble. 2 phantom fumbles. Two.
I don't know.
The one that
I
they
don't know
gave
what to tell you,
Bama,
man.
Bama's way. Both actually went Bama's way. The Bryce Young, Jordan Davis sack, fumbles overturned. The Stetson Bennett should have been an incomplete pass, was overturned into a fumble. Both went Bama's way. Now, hey, look, here's my thing about it. I get what you're saying, Dan, and I know Dan. And Dan's not one of these people. Dan and I had this conversation last night, and we're going to transition to my rant, Dan. I've seen way too many dang Georgia folks on my timeline these last 2 years talking about Ohio State fans moaning about Marvin Harrison Jr. getting hurt, moaning about this and that, moaning about targeting, moaning about Bama fans complaining about Jameson Williams not having the best two receivers, who aren't there anymore, by the way. To be on my timeline after this game and say the reason Georgia lost because of the refs. Dan's not saying that 100% at all. Dan has been on this program, has just said Georgia didn't play its best game. Now, granted, there were some questionable calls that happened, but Dan hasn't blamed it, 100% on the rest. But I've seen people do it, Dan. I've seen people do it since the day that clock hit triple zeros. It was an incredible run. But please, 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 please don't be the hypocrites that are out here saying Georgia lost this game because the refs didn't want them to win. Don't do it. Not for me. Let's not do that because Georgia didn't play its best game at all. Bama probably wasn't their best game either, but it was pretty dang close to it. So got to give them credit there. Dan, I want to touch on this real quick. We had some transfer portal news. A lot of transfer portal news over the last 24 hours here. Brock Vandagriff, CJ Madden, Darius Smith. Who else? Austin Blasky. You got some names there. Interesting one. Probably the most newsworthy one is Brock Vandagriff. Obviously, the backup quarterback, number 2 on the depth chart behind Carson Beck. I can't say I'm shocked about this. I think you and I talked about this in the offseason. We probably expected it to happen, especially if Carson came back. Brock would probably leave because by all means, you've been here for 3 years now. Go get your chance to play. If it's not here, go somewhere else and go play and have your shot at being an NFL quarterback. What are your reactions so far to the transfer portal news?
Well, not only do I mean, Brock has to leave. It's not one of those where he should leave. No, dude, you got to leave. You've got to play. You have not played a football game in 3 years. That's not good for your development. You have to play. And if there's no clear path to you playing right away, you've got to go. And then there's no hate involved. Nobody in the space should have a single negative thing to say to that young man. Because common sense will tell you he's got to go play. I mean, Brock he's there. It's either play or quit at this point because you're either trying to get to the next level or you're not, and he's got to play, right? And Gunner's coming right up on that, where with Brock out of the way, that kind of allows him to have an opportunity to move into that number 2 role. But then also read the writing on the wall, right? You've got 2 elite quarterbacks coming in. One of them who's supposedly this generation. Now, listen, we've seen him play. I like him a lot, but I'm just going to say supposedly because you just can't say for sure. But I mean, the kid's supposed to be Patrick Mahomes. I mean, I've watched him play some of the stuff he does, the arm angles, the off balance platform stuff, where he's a hell of a quarterback. I mean, he's really, really good. You guys are in love with the Pug guy. I don't know anything about him. I've never seen one of his football games. I mean, I've seen some highlights and stuff like that, but hell, I could put together a highlight package with my son and make him look like freaking Patrick Mahomes, and he's not even close. But I mean, you could do it, right? So it's hard to tell by that. But you and I and Jeremiah went to the Mill Creek Buford game to watch him play. Terrible, terrible conditions. Buford did not block well up front. Mill Creek pounded the shit out of that kid all night long, and I left the game more impressed with him than I was before because he answered the bell every single time. Got up, they had 13 or 14 drops in that game?
It was a lot.
He
got hit.
He got hammered.
Luke Metz smoked him.
Luke Metz took him in half. But he got right back up. I mean, and that's my point is I think that's a hell of a quarterback. And, we're making a big circle. But anyway, he had to leave. The other guys, I mean, it is what it is at this point. We've been told, was it Brandon Adams on his show said that Kirby expects as many as 17 guys to hit the transfer portal, which I think that's around the number that we had last year. If I'm not mistaken, it was in that ballpark. And I think it's just par for the course. Now, Ohio State had 11 dudes on day one jump in the portal. which is not good. It's not a good look, especially when you got 5-star kids jumping in there and then your starting quarterback jumps in there. But then I read somewhere last night and where he was told that they just want to go in a different direction. What are you laughing about?
Nothing. I'm Jonathan sent a tweet. Never mind. Sorry. I should put you solo screen. Go ahead.
No, that's fine. Go ahead. No, you're in. So I don't really care about the transfer portal at this point. I mean, we saw some idiot trying to say that Michael Williams is entering the transfer portal. I mean, listen, he could, right? I mean, it's the age like Dick Vitale had he went off. Dick Vitale just talking about how this is a complete waste. But anyway, what do you think?
Nothing shocked me yet. Like last year around this time, actually it wasn't around this time. It was probably a little bit later. A.D. Mitchell obviously entered in, which there was smoke around that and, here and there. But I'm interested, Dan, to see that if Georgia does have a few starters go in because you've had some over the last few years. Obviously, I think this year more than anything, if someone is going to go in as a starter, the starter going in, it would most likely be they're trying to play another year of eligibility and Georgia should have a spot for him. That happens. But yeah, nothing shocking to me. Obviously, Vok Vandergriff has been linked with Kentucky, South Carolina, and there's one more SEC team that they have in there. I forget the third one. But anyways, it seems like he's going to stay in the SEC, and Georgia will likely see him next year if that is in fact where he decides to go. Dan, final thoughts. Let's get playoff reactions. Obviously, Georgia draws to Florida State in the Orange Bowl. The narrative so far, which isn't surprising to me, is that Georgia's walking into a hornet's nest when, since FSU is undefeated and they should be in the playoffs. But I feel like Georgia, Kirby Smart pointed this out in the press conference, Georgia's also a hornet's nest. Like that narrative's already developing. Like Georgia just all of a sudden doesn't have playoff expectations, even though they lost, but Florida State does, and they're disappointed about it. Like, let's not make it there. Early indications seem to be that Georgia's going to have almost a full strength team. Like I can't think of many starters opting out of this football game.
Well, there will be some. I mean, because we saw the who was it? It was the DB. Who help me? Please help me. Who was the DB that said he was going to play the whole time? Baker. Yeah, Baker, and he backed out the day before the game, something like that, and that pissed Kirby off pretty bad.
Ever since then, his philosophy's changed. You're either all in or you're all out. If
right.
You don't practice, you're not playing.
So I don't know what's going to. I mean, but listen, if we're being honest, you're not going to see 100% Georgia. Kirby can say whatever he wants to, and you guys can kill me in the ads. I don't care. Like you're not going to see the 100% ready to go Georgia. You're just not. And to be honest, I don't know that you're going to see 100% all in Florida State because those kids. I'm surprised that more of them haven't opted out at this point, like the ones that are going to go to the NFL. But I don't even know how many NFL football players they have. Is he going to be an NFL player? I mean, obviously, I saw where they gave him like a first-round grade at one point.
There's 3 people on that roster that I think are obviously going to be high picks. Jared Verse, the first-round edge rusher. You said Coleman, that's a good one. Johnny Wilson. I don't know if he's eligible this year or if it's next year. But obviously, those are 3 guys that could be really high draft picks. That have not announced their opt-outs. I think Caleb Williams is the only one that I've seen opt out of a bowl game so far. And obviously that's 7-5 USC. But yeah, I'm real interested, Dan, because you and I had this conversation 3 weeks ago. It was actually right after Brock Bowers' injury where we said, hey, with the culture of this team, with what we know about some of these guys, like to me at the time, it felt like we may not see opt-outs if Georgia, doesn't make the playoffs. But obviously there's a long way to go until that game. I think 25 days.
I'll tell you this right now. Georgia has the weight of the world on their shoulders in that football game because the entire college football management structure needs Georgia to beat the hell out of Florida State.
It feels it's similar to the Peach Bowl a few years ago when you played Cincinnati, and Cincinnati got left out. Obviously, although this is a Power 5 team.
And that was a lot closer game than, that was we won that on a field goal. So like Cincinnati could, but like this is one of those situations, guys, where if Florida State beats us, like, oh, hell's going to break loose. So we need to beat the hell out of them. But we'll get into that and talk about that and the matchups and all that stuff because we have shows to do in the future and we don't want to just completely blow our content now, because if we do, then we're going to have to struggle to come up with something. But I know. Let me just finish up by saying this: Georgia football. I know you'll never see this. I know there's not a single player on the team that will see this. But if you did, I would love you to know that for the last 2 years, you guys have provided unlimited entertainment in my house, and provided me with a level of joy that I've never experienced in my lifetime rooting for any sports football team. So from the very bottom of my heart, thank you very much for the last 2 years. And now I cannot wait to start a new streak. So, but it's been a great, fabulous 2 years. And if you only lose once every 29 games or every 30 games, I think I can live with that.
Absolutely. Dan, I didn't tell you about this, but I'm going to go ahead and tell you now. Surprise segment. Blind drafts back. I have one for you.
Real quick.
Unprepared. You don't even know the topic. We're doing the rankings of the most beloved Georgia Bulldogs of all time. 1 through 5.
What?
1 through 5.
All
Here
right.
we go. Let's rank them. Number 1, Jordan Davis.
Ooh. All right. So there's only really one guy that I'll put him at 3. I'll put Jordan Davis at 3. I feel safe. I love Jordan Davis.
All right. Up next, Nick Chubb.
2.
Jake Fromm.
5.
Stetson Bennett.
All right. So you're going to piss me off if
I got one that I think I know who you're going to put at 1, but I'm holding him. I saved him for last.
4.
All right. Todd Gurley.
Yes, number 1. Perfect. That worked out perfectly.
So I think you are fine with this. But if you had a name, if you want to substitute your top 5, obviously I think Jake Fromm you probably take off the list right now. But I only listed 3. I did it off the top of my head. What is anybody beating Gurley for you?
No. Gurley is my favorite player I've ever seen at Georgia in my life. Now listen, Herschel Walker played at Georgia when I was 1 year old and 2 years old. So I mean, I never saw Herschel, but everybody has a place in their heart for Herschel. So, but my list is based on people that I've seen play, and Todd Gurley for me was always number. I mean, he was every time he touched the ball, I thought he was going to score every single time. Nick Chubb, he's right up there. But Nick Chubb more so because of who he is, more than everything else. Jordan Davis is just lovable. And then I put Stetson at 4 because that's who you gave me. But for me, if I was going to round out my top 5, I would put Aaron Murray in there. I love Aaron Murray. Now, listen, are there better players? For sure. Like, I mean, you could go AJ Green. You could do David Pollock and all those guys. But for me, Aaron Murray is one of my top 5 favorite Georgia football players of all time. And
he only goes up the list because he's on the show too. He just keeps rising. Had a great interview with him.
Yeah, I mean, but it has zero to do with that. I just always been a big Aaron Murray fan, and I think he got a lot of people. I mean, obviously Matthew Stafford is great, but like, to be completely honest, when Matthew Stafford was at Georgia, I was more disappointed in him than I was happy. Like because you just kind of always expected more, and that's probably unrealistic and not fair. And then the only other person that I would put on a list would be Noshawn Marino. I love Noshawn Marino. And I used to love how he used to get up so fast, and it would piss everybody off that he would jump up so fast. But anyway, all right.
Hey, I'm happy with that one. I think you nailed that one. I wanted to make it tough. I threw Fromm in there, not because he's hated or anything like that. I just off the top of my head, I was like, who's one I can get? Who's one I can get Dan to maybe mess up his rankings and put a guy at 1 that he really wanted at 5. But hey, I'm happy with it. Dan's gonna come back with a blind draft next week. I'm not gonna know the topic. I'm gonna let Dan pick the topic, and then he's gonna surprise me on the show with this one. So hey, it is back. We got weeks to cover till the Orange Bowl. Georgia versus Florida State. We appreciate you for being here, folks. Episode 111, 112. I forget.
One something.
of the Top Talk podcast. I'm your host, Harris Marino. Alongside me, co-host Dan Kiley. We'll be back hopefully next week at our regular time slot, but we will see. It may change depending on what's going on in our lives. Anyways, folks, enjoy your Saturdays. Army-Navy game this Saturday. Then we got like a weekend of no college football for the first time in months.
It will be replaced by NFL football, so you'll have football.
All right, folks. Well, we'll see you next week. Tuesday,
As always,
7:30.
go Dogs.